Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Explainer. So today we're taking a deep dive into the source material from Michael Lewis's iconic book, Moneyball. And let me tell you, if you're the kind of person who loves seeing how broken systems get completely hacked and rewired for success, you are absolutely going to love this one. We're unpacking the ultimate David versus Goliath story here. But, this one isn't fought with slingshots. It's a battle fought with statistics, scouting, and just completely rethinking professional baseball from the ground up. This wasn't some minor little tweak to the sport. We're talking about a massive paradigm shift that permanently changed the fundamental math of a billion-dollar industry.
Okay, let's dive into this. Right off the bat, pun absolutely intended, we have to ask the fundamental question at the very center of this whole story. How on earth does a poor team beat a super wealthy Goliath? It's a puzzle that sparked one of the greatest shifts in sports history. Because think about it, when the rules of the game are tied completely to how much cash you have in the bank, the team with no cash, well, they have to invent a totally new way to play.
Section 1. David versus Goliath, the financial imbalance.
So, let's set the stage here and look at the crazy financial imbalance that forced this whole revolution to happen. On one side, you've got the New York Yankees. The source material spells it out clearly. They have a ton of money. We're talking a Goliath-sized payroll pushing $120 million. They basically have endless wealth. They can just throw cash around to get literally anyone they want on their roster. But then, on the other side, you have our David, the Oakland A's. They're scraping by on a paltry $38 million. It's a desperate situation. Their general manager, Billy Beane, he can't just buy superstars like the Yankees do. He has to find discount players. He needed a radically efficient way to get absolute maximum value for every single dollar spent, or else, well, his team would be mathematically dead in the water before the season even kicked off.
Section 2. Traditional scouting, the old system.
To really appreciate Billy Beane's radical solution, we first got to understand the totally broken system he was up against. You see, for decades, evaluating baseball talent relied on this very traditional, highly subjective checklist. Scouts would literally drive around from field to field, personally sizing up players based on, well, a gut feeling. They look at how fast a guy runs, how well he throws, how he hits, his home run power, his fielding, the usual stuff, right? But get this, it didn't stop at just athletic ability. They actually evaluated whether a player had a TV face. Seriously, like, do they visually look like a handsome, stereotypical baseball player? It was an entire system built on the highly subjective, flawed judgment of these traveling scouts. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer absurdity of that old guard. As the author Michael Lewis allegedly pointed out, evaluating players back then was basically just scouting for bodies. If a scout saw a tall person, they practically started to swoon. Think about that for a second. They were making multi-million-dollar investments based heavily on aesthetics, jawlines, and a hunch, instead of hard, objective reality. They were quite literally judging a book by its cover and paying a massive premium to do it.
Section 3. The sabermetrics era, a data revolution.
Okay, so here is where the game fundamentally changes, and it's all thanks to a guy named Bill James and, believe it or not, the concept of fantasy baseball. In fantasy baseball, right, people are obsessively looking at player stats to predict who's going to get the most hits, strike out the most batters, and just score the most points. Bill James takes this statistical obsession and realizes something wild. The official Baseball Commission stats, they were actually terrible at predicting real player success. Why? Because the traditional stats wrongly assumed baseball was this simple duel of man versus man. But James, he looked at it completely differently. He saw the game as man in circumstance versus other man in circumstance. He literally mapped out these grids on the field to track exactly where a batter could control the ball. Practically speaking, this meant studying the specific geometry of the field and how a player reacts to exactly where a pitch goes. He proved that specific spots on the field fundamentally alter the statistical action. So evaluating a player was way more complex than just watching a guy swing a bat.
So the crucial point is this definition right here, sabermetrics. Bill James took all those findings and created a highly efficient, strictly mathematical method to figure out who is actually going to win games. General manager Billy Beane took this statistical approach, fed it all into a computer, and used it as his absolute secret weapon to build a hyper-efficient team. And you know what the best part was? This machine completely removed human bias. It didn't care one bit about a player's TV face or how gracefully they jogged around the bases. It only cared about the cold, hard numbers that actually produced runs.
Section 4. Building the roster, the misfit team.
Let's look at how this actually translates to the physical roster of the Oakland A's. Billy Beane used sabermetrics to strictly evaluate statistical strengths for very specific roles, while completely ignoring obvious physical weaknesses. Take this perfect example. A 35-year-old batter. Now, to a traditional scout, this guy is way too old, he looks awful at the plate, and he definitely can't hit a home run. Just a hard pass, right? But to Bean's machine, this player has incredible accuracy. He knows every single pitcher in the league, so he can predict their throws. Most importantly, he has a massively high on-base percentage, or OBP. And OBP is the absolute holy grail in sabermetrics. It's a pure measurement of how often a batter actually reaches base, whether that's a hit, a walk, or even just taking a pitch to the ribs. The machine knew that consistently getting on base is what creates runs. This guy does zero harm to the team, and if he can just play the outfield, he becomes a tremendously valuable, heavily discounted asset.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this number, 88. In the old school scouting world, you want a pitcher throwing a 92 to 94 mile per hour fastball. If you're out there throwing 88 miles per hour, those traditional scouts are literally going to laugh you right off the field. But Bean found a pitcher throwing exactly 88 miles per hour who was incredibly deceptive. Statistically speaking, this slower pitcher actually had a higher success ratio than almost anyone else in the league. It just completely threw the batter's timing off. Bean actively hunted for these exact kinds of players. Guys with vastly superior numbers that traditional scouting totally missed because they were so blinded by the raw speed of a fastball.
This radical approach even flipped where they sourced their talent. So traditionally, scouts love drafting kids straight out of high school. Why? Well, they're younger, you could pay them a lot less, they're in their physical prime, and their bodies just have less mileage. It's all about that raw, untapped potential. But look, if you're Billy Bean and your entire system runs on data, potential means absolutely nothing. You need proof. And where do you find that proof? This led him to heavily favor college drafts. Think about it, college players come with a much larger data track record. They give you the years of statistical proof over time that sabermetrics absolutely requires. By drafting out of college, Bean wasn't just making a wild guess. He was calculating a sure thing.
Section 5. Challenging the status quo. Fighting the system.
Of course, you really can't spark a massive revolution without starting a war, and the pushback Bean faced was just incredible. Professional baseball had become this totally closed system. The institution had completely stopped accepting new information from the outside. These front office rooms were packed with former players and traditionalists who fiercely guarded their gut-feeling methods. When Bean actually brought his data to the table, the reaction was brutal. Dripping with arrogance, they essentially looked at him and said, "What do you know about baseball? This is just statistical nonsense that nerds look at."
So to make this work, Billy Bean basically had to go to war with his own staff. Going up against decades of institutional knowledge is incredibly messy. Just imagine how hard it is to force veterans to completely abandon their life's work, their entire methodology, for a computer algorithm they don't even understand. They felt like their expertise was being erased. The source material notes that Bean's personal journey here involved literally throwing phones at walls and having these intense temper tantrums. He had to bully and browbeat his opposition into submitting to the data. He was quite literally forcing a paradigm shift by sheer force of will, demanding that they trust the machine over their very own lying eyes.
But guys, here is the magnificent payoff. Bean's relentless commitment to the statistics, it actually worked. He managed to secure exactly the discounted, mathematically sound draft picks he wanted. These were players completely dismissed and openly laughed at by the rest of the league. And this island of misfit toys, built on a tiny little $38 million budget, succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. They went on this absolutely legendary winning streak, proving the math right once and for all. They made it to the playoffs, standing toe-to-toe to challenge the undisputed, wildly wealthy champions of the league.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. The story of Moneyball is about so much more than just baseball. It's really about looking past the TV faces of the world and seeing the hidden math underneath it all. I mean, if a deeply entrenched, multi-million-dollar institution like professional baseball can be entirely disrupted by an outsider looking at simple data, what other traditional systems in our world are just running on pure gut feeling and bias? What industry, business, or everyday system out there is just waiting right now for its very own sabermetrics revolution? Think about that as you go about your day. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.